they are working on that. And my particular hobby horse on this is ensuring, if we can, that community radio stations, especially the LPFM stations, which number about 2,000 now in the US, are afforded access to these transmissions. ATSC 3 is television, but with the competition in video media, the TV stations that have ATSC 3 licenses are very interested in alternative uses for those licenses. The FCC only requires ATSC 3 stations to have one free over-the-air channel, and all the rest can be, the audio and video can be pay broadcasts. Technically not a broadcast at all. In order for something to legally be a broadcast, it has to be free. So what we have in ATSC 3 is a return to essentially encrypted over-the-air broadcasting and an enormous capacity for audio streaming, wireless audio streaming. In addition to the other aspects, ATSC 3 is much more robust. Mobile ATSC 3, the car auto industry is very, very interested in that. And with most radio listening in the car, that's probably going to continue, but the car receivers will be far more capable. And over time, I predict, and the industry predicts, that AM and FM broadcasting will diminish, replaced not by the internet, but by these very powerful and robust ATSC 3 over-the-air digital transmissions. So the question is, how are community radio stations going to get access to these over-the-air streams? Are they going to be priced out of access to these stations? And I've had some interactions with principals at Sinclair and at I think it's Scripps Television, and these companies are pouring enormous amounts of money into ATSC 3, but the principals are really very ignorant of community radio and especially LPFM radio. So I am concerned that they're going to charge really high prices by default, and that our under-resourced and small community radio stations will be priced out and will not have access to these things. Here in San Marcos, Texas, where I am, our LPFM station is extremely low power. We have a 1 watt effective radiated power at the moment. We will be increasing that as we move after we move a transmitter site. But many LPFM stations run something like 20 watts, 25 watts, 100 watts, less than that. If you consider that the ERP of a television station can be in the millions of watts, and ATSC 3 is a much more robust and penetrative waveform than anything available today in ATSC 1, it's an enormous step up in range and building penetration, vehicle penetration to get on ATSC 3. These will no longer be low power radio stations. So this is an area that I'm watching closely. ATSC 3 receivers are on the market now, but they're not really plentiful. Dongles and all kinds of inexpensive ways to receive these broadcasts are coming, and more technical development on the radio side.
Now, Ben,
Bottom line is it's just a huge capacity for radio. So far, it's only been filled by a Canadian music service on those stations that have been using it. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, Ben, sorry, just want to, before you go on anymore, can you tell us kind of like what your journey's been like, where you got started and how you got into radio and low power TV and kind of where you've been and how you got here? Can you tell us something about that?
And Jeremy Lansman and Lorenzo Milan.
Yeah.
I grew up in Houston, and I became a volunteer at KPFT, Pacifica Station in Houston. I was a 14 or 15 years old. I had the third class license. Everybody had to have that license. But my community radio career was cut short by a couple of bombs. I think everybody here knows the KPFT was blown off the air twice by the KKK. The FBI had an informant in the Texas Klan who eventually identified the ringleader, who I believe died in prison. So instead of learning radio, I was selling bumper stickers for $1 to help raise money to rebuild the transmitter. Bucks beat bombs, what we called it. Well, KPFT did survive, as probably most of you know. It's continued. It's a more than 50-year-old station now. They recently moved into a beautiful new space there in Houston. I started various other jobs in radio. I worked at the Rice University station. I worked at a Christian radio station in Houston, probably the only Jewish gospel DJ in Houston at that time. Eventually attended University of Texas, worked in radio there, and grad school in Boulder, Colorado in telecommunications, and worked in radio and media there. When the cellular phone industry started going in the early 80s, I became the first trade journalist focused exclusively on that new industry, cellular phones. And a lot of us didn't imagine really that anything but it would be anything but a play toy for the rich, given as costly as cell phones were in the beginning. Uh, Ultimately, I was hired by Apple Computer to help them start a trade association for wireless networking. I worked on that for a number of years and ended up doing a lot of freelance writing and book writing. I wrote a 500-page book on the radio spectrum, which people still rely on today. It's kind of dangerous. There have been a lot of changes. My last full-time job, which I retired from in the summer, was working for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which Trump is determined to shut down. I'm trying to find out what's happening to my colleagues there. I worked on emergency public alerts on cell phones and on the emergency alert system, and have retired to San Marcos, where I am a volunteer at True Community Radio, KZSM, here in San Marcos. I hope that takes care of it, Paul.
Yeah, all except for one thing. What's the frequency you guys or are you guys on? How are we going to find you? What radio? What FM frequency are you on?
KZSM is at 104.1. We are co-channel with another station in Wimberley, Texas, which is causing an enormous amount of grief. And we're having to move our transmitter outside of the city limits in order to handle the short spacing. By the way, I didn't mention the connection with Jeremy. I had read about Jeremy Landsman and Lorenzo Milam when I was an undergrad at UT. Somebody loaned me Sex and Broadcasting and the Petition Against God books. I was fascinated by these things. I knew who these gentlemen were. I never imagined I would get to work for them. But when I was in Boulder in grad school, Jeremy was setting up KBDI, and he was installing a translator for that station on the roof of the building I was living in. And I followed him up to the roof, having no idea really who he was or what he was doing or what was going on, and helped them install this translator, eventually introduced ourselves to each other, and turned out it was Jeremy. He gave me a job working for a small company he had at the time, a broadcast engineering firm, originally called American Translator Development, later just ATD, and then eventually Low Power Technology. So I helped them do the FCC paperwork on hundreds of LPTV stations and a few radio stations. And they flew me out to California, met Lorenzo, and it was just a thrilling time in my life to both be connected to these gentlemen as well as to learn the ropes of the FCC process.
Mute myself, don't I? Give us that call. That call again. I want to jot that down. What is that? I'm going to
Our
try to
station
get your
here
station in
is
because I'm not
Crazy
far from
Zoo
you.
San Marcos, KZSM.
KZS.
KZSM LP. San Marcos has a long record of pirate operations. There's a whole book written about this called Rebels on the Air, an alternative history of radio in America. It's a tremendous book, and some of the people involved in the early pirate operations are still connected with us today. Uh,
Is it true, Ben, that the current fine for operating a low power station is $1 million a day and
you mean a
loss of all
pirate
your
station, an
equipment?
unlicensed station?
An unlicensed station, yeah.
It's it's not that high, but it is very high, and it was increased by legislation because when the FCC finds an unlicensed operator, often the Justice Department is not interested in collecting the fine. And I can tell you that on some very good high level advice, which is why the FCC is constantly announcing that they're imposing these fines, but will never say if any of them are paid.
Right.
Few are paid. So the fines keep getting increased and increased and increased. And the point of it is, I suppose, to scare away people who don't have millions of dollars, but it's really to try to induce the DOJ to go after these people, which it seldom does.
Real good, Ben. It's great to hear you again. And we've got some other folks in here. We've got Betty McCardle's in here, Michael Brown, and Jacob Dugan Brous. Brous, is that how you say it, Jacob? What? Tell us about yourself and what you're up to, and if you have any feedback on what Ben just said. Go ahead. Unmute, unmute,
There we
unmute
go.
yourself.
All right. I'm there now, right?
Yeah, you're
Uh,
good now. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Jacob, I'm in Northern Ireland. I've been here 3 years, 15 years in the London area. Left the United States in 2006. Um, and that was a result of myself and my husband of 45 years, well, 45 years as a couple, but we did same-sex marriage litigation in Alaska, concomitant with Hawaii, working independently of national organizations at the time against their direction. So I know quite a bit about being a freewheeling community activist. Jeremy is somebody who was on my board at one time in Anchorage, Alaska. I know Carol and Jeremy, and so that's one of the reasons I didn't sign on with the ceremony because that was tough for me personally. Um, but Jeremy was a leading light for us. My partner and I, in 1985, formed a queer theater company in Anchorage, Alaska. We had NEA funding. We were in the rounds with lots of national fights, New York Times, Boston Globe, other papers. We've done that battle. We've done that battle to the point where, to put it in the parlance of many community activists, I became a crispy critter, uh, where I had to just leave for my own mental well-being the place that I loved more than the United States, and that was Alaska. But I had done, while I was at university, first time round, public television work, working on floor manager, stuff like that. But I got involved in the radio station as well while I was doing that. And like so many people, I fell in love with it. And when I became director, co-director with this arts organization with my partner, Eugene, um, in 1990, uh, I had brought the idea to the board about doing something someday, maybe. Well, it was getting to know through Jeremy, who got on my board and really leaned on me, particularly because he knew of my interest, um, to look into LPFM. Uh, and was able to fight against a well-pitted, well-armed Seventh-day Adventist congregation in our area that really had the moxie to pull it off. But Jeremy was able to get us in touch with John Krigler, FCC attorney, DC, very expensive, way over our budget and league. But we pulled together the money, and he did pro bono work for us as well. But we fought 6 years for that license, and we got it. That happened 2 years after I left the country in 2008. the organization, as what happens with founding members, started taking some different positions. LPFM became less important to them. They got the signal on air, but the board was going to turn back the license. And thank God we had some of those people that Jeremy seated in the LPFM structure who were true renegades, the pirate type bandits, radio fame, who would not take shutdown as an answer. And they took the transmitter equipment out of the building and Jerry rigged it in the VW, van to keep that license on air. And that board got eliminated because of the uproar over this and some other things they were doing. So this is LPFM, the classic dimensions as I read your stories. So many of us, whether we were corporate and pinned down, we come out of activism, we come out of whatever. Um, I was somebody who knew how to work politics and funding, but Jeremy, without him, we would not have gone to air. He knew people. I am not a friend to the political philosophy of libertarianism. I think it's ripping apart the United States right now. It's a founding religion now with many people on the right, and it's hugely destructive. And it comes with Schumpeter and and Hayek and other people, European thinkers, and Americans don't understand that they've fallen prey to something that isn't native soil. And Jeremy was in a lot of ways libertarian, but with a small L. As many radio people I have found, and I want to put this on all of us. We are a renegade spirit I've really found in this community, but I would call myself not libertarian, but old school internationalist, with a capital I, leaning towards socialism as a social good. And I so conflict with where a lot of us are at. My organization became part of the community, community broadcasters, whatever it was. We got involved with some native broadcasters as well, um, and got a real sense. But you're talking to somebody who's left the organization years ago. The board, current board there has contacted both of us to see what they should do. They're looking at selling the license. I instructed them with sites of how they cannot sell an LPFM. They thought they were going to sell it to two organizations that are setting themselves up to be new nonprofits. And if I read the regulations correctly, you still have to be in existence for 2 years before you can take on such a community license. I'm here because I'm kind of appealing if there's someone here rather than me. I'm a founder. I can't speak to the board. They would spit me out because founders are poison to successor organizations. Um, we're the prophetic voice. They're the managers, but they're on the verge of closing down that LPFM that's so vitally needed in a place like Alaska. Alaska, when I moved there, was a Democratic stronghold. All but two of its legislature were Democrats. Hawaii, just the inverse. Now, Hawaii is Democrat. Alaska's it's always been majority Republican for the last 20 years. It's a very different place than I knew when I moved there in 1959. And this has happened all over the country. And I feel LPFM, among those people who are trying to resist now, are so important. But you and I both know, all of us here know, licensing, looking what Dodge is doing, completely ignoring structures that are in place. I don't know how well the structure can take those wins. So I realize everything can be recorded, everything we say can be surveilled. I have friends who are in Russia. I live in Europe. Um, I'm working on building the peace here in Northern Ireland now is my project where we have to create a new nation. It's a fun project to be involved at 70 years of age. Um, but what is known as a sectarian divide here between Catholic and Protestant history is one I learned is also in the United States. The Scots-Irish immigrants that moved to the United States largely went south through the Appalachians. and they seeded what became the Confederacy through plantation system, what we have here in Northern Ireland. There's so much that I wish Americans understood about the bifurcation that happened in the United States because of the history here in the United Kingdom. And so much of what I see that's going on with the family orientation of the South, the religious orientation of the South culture, was born here. And I wish I could get some scholars from some of the universities to do some broadcasts with you over in the United States to begin to unravel the roots of why you have the problem you have today. Um, and it's just as hard here. There's a phrase that Scots Irish use. It's called never surrender. And it means never surrender, to the Catholics. They take a position that they'll first arm themselves, then to make a solid peace. I fear that you're running into that type of hard-headedness in your own country now. I think that's enough.
All right. Well, great to hear from you in Ireland there, and we'll get back to you. And then next time we come around to you, I want you to talk more about the future and what the
Yeah,
past means for the future. What lessons have we learned from Jeremy and others, and
yeah.
how can we learn from those and go forward, move forward to the future of community radio. And Michael Brown's with us. Michael, where are you located today?
Well, Oregon,
What part?
uh, southwest corner, kind of on the edge of Tigard and Mountain Park. So
All right. So,
it's called West Portland Park. So yeah.
do you have any reaction or observations based on what Ben and San Marcos and Jacob in Ireland have talked about? And tell us about yourself and what your thoughts are on how the past that Jeremy epitomized, what it means for our future.
Okay. Well, there's 4 or 5 sections of this. From my standpoint, I got into radio in 1974. I worked in commercial radio until 1990, and grew up in Southern California, did some, mostly as a listener to community radio. I did some volunteer work with KPFK. Didn't really have a lot of no interaction with Lorenzo, and limited with Jeremy, mostly at conferences, and knew of their history. But Betty's on this call also. My wife Betty and I took a year off in '91, traveled around the world, bicycled around the world, wrote a book about it, which has never been published. But and after that, really took a different direction, and went. I was a radio engineer and news director at small market stations, and also did DJ work. Eventually settled on the engineering end of it. After our trip, did more work, increasing amount of work with non-commercial radio, and got into consulting work primarily and FCC applications. So over the last 30 years, have been involved and filed over 2,000 FCC applications. And so I helped a lot of community stations get started, built a few of them, but mostly did their FCC work. So at this point I'm edging towards retirement, still doing the FCC work, but doing a limited amount of field work. But I have an interest beyond the technical, although my expertise is in that. I was going to answer or a couple of comments on what Jacob and Bennett said. With low power FM, they are allowed to sell, but only for the actual value of their hard assets. So they can recover their cost in putting together a studio and transmitter, but beyond that, no, they cannot make a profit. And as far as who they can sell to, it depends on how the current licensee was granted. If they were granted on a comparative basis, which included 2 years of incumbency, then for a holding period of time, I think it's 4 years, any new owner would have to have qualify for the same or greater number of points. If it's beyond that holding period, or if the original licensee was not granted on the basis of a comparative, they were granted as a singleton or did a settlement, then there's no requirement that the new licensee have 2 years of incumbency. They could be a nonprofit that was formed yesterday and become the new licensee today. So I wanted to, so the shorter answer is it depends. And so we can research all this rather easily, by the way. So if you want to call us or they want to call us, we can give them some answers.
Can't they include the
Yeah,
cost of
Betty
6
McCardle.
years?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Betty.
hi,
I think you
everybody.
have a response to all this.
Yeah, I do. Michael, I think that they can, in the sale price, they can include what they have expended on attorneys to get their license and engineers to get their license.
So out of pocket expenses. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. In addition to buying the equipment. Now, I don't know if it's the cost of new equipment or if it's, okay, that word's not going to come to me.
Appreciated cost. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate.
As a practical matter, if the amount isn't large, like if it's 4 or 5 figures and not 6 figures, I've never heard of it being scrutinized. So anyway, and
How long has that station been on the air?
KONR. It went on license on air. I wasn't around. I think they started doing 24-hour. I forget who the artist was, but they just put it on play repeat. And that was, I think, in 2012 is when they first went on air.
Oh, that's long enough
yeah.
Yeah.
for what Michael and I are talking about.
And I
Definitely.
wanted to add that in Alaska, excuse me, Alaska is kind of a different animal in which Alaska groups, sorry about my throat, can acquire new Class D stations, which is basically the low power FM of the 70s. And so we have helped license a handful of these in Alaska. It's the only place in the country that can do that. And so Alaska, you don't have to wait for any filing window. If you can find a frequency that works, and they're allowed now to do the LPFM style second adjacent waivers.
Mhm.
So in essence, you can have what amounts to a low power FM station at Class D station without waiting for any window anywhere in Alaska. So from that standpoint, it's the demise of this station maybe isn't, if that happens, which would be unfortunate, isn't necessarily a death knell for community radio, small community radio in that area. Although the frequency might be grabbed up by somebody else, so it'd be best to save it if you could.
Yeah. I can Paul, can you hear me when I'm speaking right now? Because I just wanted to ask Betty and
Yeah, I
Mike.
can, Jacob, I can hear you. Betty, would you just briefly tell us about yourself so we know
So I could
who
get in
you
touch
are
with
a little better?
I want to hear what Jacob has to say.
All right,
Well,
Jacob, you
I was
you
just going
take
to
it.
ask if I could privately somehow talk with Michael and Betty, if I can refer you on to the board there. I don't know what your fee structure is or anything, but I know they could use some guidance. That's the only thing I'd like to do for them.
Well, Paul has asked me, yes, the answer is yes. And I'll let you know in a second here.
Okay.
Paul's asked me to tell a little bit about myself. As Michael said, we are a married couple for 42 years. But as Jacob also said, we've been together 48. So 13, 14 years ago, there was a LPFM window and it closed, and community groups that we run into said, "Oh, I wish I'd known about that." So Michael and I decided to start a nonprofit here in Oregon to let organizations know when there was an opportunity to apply for non-commercial radio station. We called it Community Media Assistance Project. It's called CMAP. We've evolved over the years to do a lot more than that people know about Windows. In fact, the latest thing that CMAP is doing, we have produced a Substack called FCC Actions Alert, wherein me and another woman, Peggy Hinkle-Wolf, who is a journalist, thank you, monitor dozens of listservs, other Substacks, any kinds of sources to see if actions have happened that may affect community radio stations now or possibly in the future, so that they can prepare themselves or change some of the things they're doing or add things that they should be doing. So that's been taking up a lot of time. I also host and produce notes for Radio for People, which is a loose-knit group of community radio professionals, like engineers and attorneys, and also people that come over from stations, like Ben. Ben comes to those meetings. And I'm also on the board of Oregon Community Media, which is an incorporated group of Oregon community radio stations so far. We're only having radio at the moment, but we called it community media with the possibility of other forms of media joining in. And we share programming, a variety of things. I'm not with any one station. Who did that? Michael. I'm with all of stations. Michael likes to call me the handholder to community radio. And, being with him for all these years, I've learned, a shitload of stuff about radio. Strangely enough, my father
Okay,
was
let's keep it clean here. It's a clean
okay,
show.
all
Okay,
right.
Betty?
How about a buttload? That's a barrel of ale. So that's me. I'm sitting here in my office in Portland. What's it doing out there? Hey, it's not raining. Wowzer.
Well, what she didn't say is she has radio in her blood. Her father helped build KEX's 50,000 watt station. There's pictures of her at the transmitter site at age 4, wandering around the transmitters. So I found the right person who understands radio and being gone at 3 a.m. Many times.
Do it than that, yeah. That's it, Paul.
Now, I've got a question for the whole panel.
Betty, tell them your website. Jacob should visit your
Oh, yeah.
website for
What's
CMAP.
your
It is
website?
under construction, but hey, I'll put my email in the chat. So look in the whoa. And Michael, did you give me something? Ick.
No.
So I'm putting my email in the chat.
And put the link for the Substack also.
Oh, what a good idea. So there's the website. If they go, I'll have to find the link because I never use it because I go in through the back door, So go ahead, and Paul, you were going to ask a question of.
Okay. Now, last week we kind of looked at the past. We looked at Jeremy and what his contribution was and all the many radio stations that he started. And now we find ourselves at kind of a juncture, with the government changing and and all the winds of change. So what's your advice for low power community FM radio stations? For example, like KOOP in Austin, which is in Ben's listening area, or KUHS in Hot Springs, and other low power stations around the country and around the world. What's your advice to them? How should they adapt and change to this changing world? And I'll start it with Ben, and then we'll go to Jacob and then Betty, okay? So go ahead, Ben, you pick it up.
Many of these stations are concerned mainly with survival. And radio is still a multi-billion-dollar business, but because there are so many other ways to get audio entertainment, and ownership of radio receivers is in decline, except in the vehicle. These are some of the challenges a lot of stations have. What I think my advice is that community radio needs to continue to be outrageous. It needs to get up front in the awareness of their local communities. Here in San Marcos, our station has a studio right on a main street with a storefront. We seem to have a continuous flow of local musicians coming in the studio performing live. So any kind of strategy like this, getting into people's awareness, producing events, learning how to operate without a lot of money, all these things are the challenges. Betty and Michael know this very, very well. These things are covered, by the way, at our annual grassroots radio conferences to which they contribute. I don't have a magic wand. I do think if stations can get on the ATSC3 signals, their geographic reach and power will expand tremendously, but there will also be a lot of competition for the listener's ear. As far as what's happening in the government, it is well known in the field of radio spectrum that a crisis can be very motivating. All it will take is for this insane new FCC administration to take some pot shots at nonprofit media to gain attention and to generate energy for fighting back. I hope that kind of thing doesn't happen, but I've been watching the new chairman of the FCC long before he became chairman, and I've sat through his interminable rants on the bench at the commission in DC. And I'm extremely concerned, but right now he has his sights set on National Public Radio and PBS. And if he can extinguish those things, maybe he'll keep his hands off of low power FM.
Let me interject. Jim from the ATX just jumped in here. Jim, are you you want to? I'll bring you up to date. We're just talking about last week. We talked about the past, and now we want to talk about the future of low power FM radio. So, could you tell us a little bit about your vision for the future of low power radio? I know you're starting a new station in Kyle, Texas, which is in the listener area of Ben and myself. Jim, if you'd turn on your video, if you're still with us. Okay, all right. Well, let's go over to Jacob and we'll get back to Jim there later on down the line here.
I'm sorry, you can hear me, but you can't see me, right?
You can't see you, no.
Okay, one moment. I'll talk a little bit here, maybe. Yes, as I suspect that bright stars like Ben and Bob have opined that this is in all likelihood the last go around for LPFM. There's very limited spectrum left. The commission has plenty of other things to do. It's certainly low priority. There's no one that I'm aware of that would carry water, as they say, for the issue. Perhaps it might happen, but the last LPFM window, as we all know, was a decade ago, 10 long years. And a lot of us feel we should have applied for more. Austin Airways actually applied for 6 licenses under the uh, public safety type of application, the vast majority are educational. And Austin Airways, one of our things is we want to use LPFMs for public safety, local disasters that are only of interest to the local community. We are most well known for putting the radio station on the air in the Astrodome. And so we, as a posturing, lobbying position, applied for 6 licenses, all small Central Texas towns, all of which have a history of floods and fires and other disasters. We had a long and difficult conversation with 2 lawyers and 2 engineers, which came to the conclusion that we kind of knew all along that you can only apply for 1. And so that conversation became known as Drop 5 to Save 1. In Kyle, Texas, stepped right up. They had a grant writer there who'd gotten most of the funds for the station in nearby Wimberley. The city offered us a tower, and even though there's not a whole lot going on culturally, musically, etc., in Kyle, they stepped right up. So Kyle was the lucky winner. We have a CP in hand, and we'll be on the air in a few months. More broadly speaking, we are organizing a statewide, we don't even have a name for it yet. We're just calling a gathering of LPFMs and non-commercial FMs. Our next meeting will be in about a month in Kyle. And the last 2 meetings, we've had about 20, 25 people. People are returning. And the whole idea, taking the advice of the attorneys and the Friends of Pacifica and others, is we should organize so we have a statewide group that speak with one voice. That's sort of where we're at. Once I finish this project in Kyle, we are looking further afield to the Kingdom of Bhutan. If anybody has any connections to Bhutan, please speak up. Thanks, Terry. Paul Wallace.
Yeah, I have no connections to Bhutan. I don't know, maybe somebody else here does, but yeah, great, Jim. Great to have you here today. And
Sorry,
I'm going to try to get Bob Nagy in here. He's out doing a spiritual meeting. It's called the Star Portal. He's kind of like becoming new age metaphysical guru these days. But I'm hoping he can jump in on his after his service today. And that's great, Jim. Great work on the Kyle. And let's pick it back up. Jacob, you were gonna hear your comments on what's just been said by Jim here. What do you think about that? We're going to change the subject in midstream here.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is where I'm on my own 2 legs because I was on the National ACLU board at one time in my life. I've worked in I would call it consumer civil litigation. That is from the people's interest against powerful people and institutions. And one of the things that my company did was we were in the courtrooms a number of times and we won every single time.
Yeah.
Usual. But we lost funding because of it. When you take on powers that be, they went after even some of our donors, and we were getting $10,000 and $20,000 from local corporations, and they would dry up overnight when we did a play that was supportive of abortion rights. And this was 20 years ago. I can't imagine how bad it's going to be now. I have to say, I've got a gray beard because of the stuff I've been through, and it's not just aging, and and but I do know this, if there are young people, because I know my energy is 1/4 of what it was when I was 20. And because I could stay up 5 days in a row. I'm lucky to be able to get up the next morning if I stay up to 3. It's those sort of things that I see around the table. We came up in a time when we knew how urgent it was to seek voice for people who weren't heard. I am not convinced of the Gen Z. I really am not.
Yeah.
They're a different generation, and they have to find their issues, and they are the ones who are going to have to carry the water. Um, I know some here in Northern Ireland, but it's because of their own unique community history. And I think some of the larger issues, I study political economy and philosophy, in a second degree, and I'm sorry, I just see so many things that come out of the brain community that's happening in America today. It is not rabble, it is organized. And um, and you have to be able to meet force with force in intellectual as well as economic venues. LPFM is, I think, one of those candles, but it is a candle. It is not a light torch. Um, and I know in my generation, boomers, we saw the need from it coming out of a very bad war. Since moving to Europe, I need to let you know my European friends are not shocked at what's really happened right now because they've always known America was a ready Roman Empire. It is an empire. To most Europeans I know, you may think that's horrible, but it says something really important that you need to know who are on the left in America, who never understood that that's how it was seen by its friends, but it is. And and I there's so much that resonates with people here as far as how they feel half of the nation's gone nuts, but it's got the half that are the power. So you guys are incredibly important, but where are the young people in our meeting today? And
We're going to
that's,
have to find some young people to
yeah,
bring in
we
here.
have to. We have to. I am so grateful I had the grandmother in my life that I found out so much she saved my father. I'm not going to go into details, but my father was the leading light. He was a pacifist. He did not serve in World War II. He told his sons not to fight in Vietnam, and we didn't.
Yeah, we know some young folks. I'll try to get them in
Yeah,
the next Saturday meeting. Betty,
yeah, really
Betty.
important. And I want to hand off the torch, really. I will help. I'll dump what experience I have. I'm speaking next month to a group at a really important venue here in Northern Ireland in Belfast, and it's about activism. Uh, and and one of the proudest moments in my life, something where we had to sue the city on a very stupid issue, but it absolutely wound up becoming a tremendous cyclone, a positive response of people who saw we had been wronged. And we were bringing in queer Black artists, homo afro homos. It was really offensive to people who were political language. And it was something we were saying, even to people on the left, settle down. They have a voice, they have something to say. That's something I do have concerns about as very much a speech libertarian, that I think we have gone too far in restricting speech, even if it's speech. I would rather be called a faggot than to have someone go to jail for saying I'm a faggot.
Yeah, there's
And
a
I,
lot of
and
good
I,
things going on in Belfast these days. One of them is
yeah,
the Accidental Theater, which my friend
yeah,
Richard
yeah.
is doing.
Oh,
You might
accidental
have
theater.
heard of that. But
And
I
what's
want to get
happening
over
here is
to
there's a lot of
let's
legal
get over to
restrictions that
Betty
are happening.
now. Let's
There's a
get
lot of
over to
legal
Betty
restrictions.
and let her react to what's been said. Okay, Betty, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Well, Jacob, you ask where the young people are. They're on their phones. And if they can't organize by being on their phones, well, they don't care. They're going to get back on their phones. They haven't had the experience that we oldies have had. They haven't gone through the 60s or the marches or any of the things that we were doing uh, 40,
so
50 years ago. Uh, they've, let's put it frankly, they've had it easy. Um, I wanted to change the subject for a minute, relate to all of you how I knew Jeremy Landsman. I didn't, but I was a total fan of Cebu when I lived in Seattle. Not Cebu, Crab when I lived in Seattle. Uh, totally on all the time. So thank you, Jeremy, for that station. And also, I don't know how, but somehow he was a friend of mine on Facebook. And every once in a while, he would comment on something I posted. So there we are. There's the connection. That's it, Paul.
All right, now, Jim and Austin, can you tell us about this group that had a big conference back in Hot Springs a couple of years ago, and they're in New Orleans, and they're getting ready to have another big event next year. Are you connected with that? And what's going on with that group? And how are they
Yeah,
going to contribute to the future of community radio?
sure. That's the GRC, which I am a celebrity. I think it's the last place I'm a big shot.
Stands for Grassroots Conference.
The Grassroots Radio Conference. They've been holding conferences just about every year. They were something of a spin-off from the NFCB, National Federation of Community Broadcasters. At one point, the NFCB was perceived as being mainly urban, white, wealthy. Many of them were applying for kind of NPR-ish grants and all. And the small people of color applicants and license holders for LPFMs gathered together. And their conferences are very good. Betty and I have been to at least 6 or 8 or 10 of them. We look forward to that. I can tell you a little sneak peek. The last GRC Zoom meeting about 3 weeks ago, they had 3 cities apply to hold the GRC 2025. They are Omaha, Nebraska, Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Spokane, Washington. There will probably be a couple other cities that will also pitch their hat into the ring to host the GRC. Portland?
No, I was waving at Karen.
Oh, yeah.
Hi.
Sorry,
Hi.
lot of friends on this list. That they are. It's an excellent conference. It's the one in New Orleans was great because they brought out all the brass bands and catering and things to do, and a beautiful historic building that they got for $1 from the city. The mayor came out. Very successful conference, and there was enough free registrations, scholarships, so a lot of people could come. We're big fans of the GRC. The little station in Kyle, not yet on the air. It just rejoined the NFCB. Austin Airways had been a member 10 or 12 years ago, partly to get all the resources they have. The NFCB's 50th anniversary and conference will be in Salt Lake City. We will go to that as well. But the GRC, to answer your question, Paul, is really very much at the cutting edge and the leaders of the LPFM movement. There's a lot of people who've really risen up through the ranks. I won't name all of them or many of them. It's a great group, and there's like the NFCB for many years, they did not have a central office or an paid employee. The NFCB now, I think, has an office with 2 employees in Montana, of all places. They're a very savvy group. Their best resource for anyone listening on this call is LPFM Solidarity on Facebook. It's a lively chat. It's mainly our kind of people. There's also another LPFM, it's called just LPFM on Facebook. That by chance or perhaps by design by the marvelous Michi, is a lot more conservatives and religious folks. And a lot of them are scrappers and will give you a hard time if you say something too libtard to them. And they seem to be kind of separated apart. I don't know why. But again, if you're interested in LPFM, the LPFM Solidarity Facebook page is the first place I would go. Thanks for asking.
Good job there. I know you're a little bit of a scrapper yourself, Jim.
That's true. Thank you.
And Judith Gibbs has her hand raised. So Judith, why don't you jump in here and say what you've got to say.
Well, yeah, I guess I wanted to respond a little bit to some of the conversation about young people and about bringing them in. Can everyone still hear me? My connection
Yes.
has.
Yeah, you can lower your hand now.
Lower your hand. Lower my hand. Yeah. Okay. So, I work as a substitute teacher in San Francisco public schools, and I've worked in other California school districts as a teacher, mostly on the substitute basis, for almost 30 years now. I needed a gig as a single mom with a small child where we'd have similar hours, and it was never meant to be a career, but I spend a lot of time around a lot of young people. And I was, one thing I'll say is, yeah, we're all on our phones all the time. I don't think we should go trashing kids for being on our phones. It kind of cracks me up in the slightly sad way when people do stuff like go on Facebook to say, wow, I'm glad I wasn't on my phone all the time. Because wait a minute, we're going on the internet to complain about today's kids being on the internet too much, unlike us. We use the technologies that were available. One of the things I've noticed about teenagers in the last 20 years, especially, is they may not always be listening to me as their teacher, but they're always listening to something. I tried getting some of them into Davey D at KPFA has been doing Hard Knock Radio for about 30 years now. It was part of realizing that there was not enough third world programming going on. It's news, views, and hip hop. And even if, like me, you're not a huge hip hop fan, it's superb. He does great interviews. He brings in all kinds of news. It's very intersectional, and especially for our kids of color who feel like, we aren't listening to them. We just want to talk about the glory days of the 60s and musically. I understand why they're a little sick of us. We got a little sick of our parents doing the same thing. But like I say, they're always listening to something. They may not be used to using radio too much. For those of you who don't know me through prior meetings or whatever, Jeremy was my first cousin. We had a set of grandparents in common. And, I've known Jeremy since he was the 16-year-old who was getting ready to apply for his license with the FCC.
And you're related to Elizabeth Gibbs also, correct?
Yeah, Elizabeth's his mother, and Elizabeth was my dad's sister, so we're closely related.
And Elizabeth lived on the farm.
Elizabeth lived on the farm. Elizabeth was, I don't know if you were on the caravan. Elizabeth was one of the eldest students who became Stephen's student and traveled to the early farm. She lasted there about 8 months. She came out and stayed with my family in Los Angeles in December of 71. I was in high school. And she was trying to decide whether to go back to the farm or not, just to bring things up to date. She never did. She was very ambivalent about this, but she took a bus up to San Francisco to visit her mother, my grandma Jane. And then she went to visit Jeremy at KDNA. She'd raised him mostly in St. Louis. And she never left. She stayed on. She developed her own program at KDNA. And when the station was sold, and Jeremy and his partner Laura and their 2-year-old Elsbeth moved out to California, Elizabeth lived with them for a while.
Yeah, that's a good bit of history there.
Anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the kids, though.
The kids. What about the kids?
I think it's really important. Like I said, they're always listening to something. They may not be listening to you and me. They might not be listening to us as their parents or grandparents or to us as their teachers, but, they got ears and they feel, they're involved in a lot of things. I'm really fortunate to be working in San Francisco where we have a social justice curriculum, and there are things that are not okay in other places that are they're part of what we do and they're part of who we are. And the schools tend to be majority people of color in San Francisco because the wealthy people who do have the white people who have wealth and who have kids, for the most part, send them somewhere else to go to school because they can afford private schools, $50,000 a year or whatever it costs these days. So we are dealing with people who they are not politically apathetic. They want to find ways to communicate with each other. I think we have to be open to meeting them where they're at. I said at I think it was when I was running for a local station board at KPFA 18 years ago or something. I just said, okay, you want to know how to attract younger people? The first thing we got to do is stop bragging about what we did in 1970 and how important we are for having been there, because they're not going to listen to that shit any more than we listen to it out of our parents. Excuse me for being a little
clean show, Judith. Clean show.
Yeah.
Clean show.
Anyway, that's about where we're at. They're fooling around on their phones. There are ways to reach them. We need to think about what technologies appeal to them, and then we have to be inclusive.
All right, I'm going to toss it over to Betty now. Betty's been waiting for a while.
If I could add something.
Okay.
Yeah, I regarding there were, in fact,
Introduce yourself, please. Introduce yourself.
again, I'm David Grace. I'm old KDNA and among other things. By the way, if you want to link to me, I'm David P. Grace at Facebook. And regarding Betty, she was talking about her organization. I think you said it was CMAP. Was it CMAP? The organization in Oregon. I was going to say
Community Media Assistance Project, CMAP. CMAP.
Good. Yeah, I'll probably email you because I know of some land down near Canyonville, and it's on a high elevation, so maybe it's possible to get a tower up there. The other thing regarding the low power, I'm going to guess that most of the low power stations don't get federal funding. And that may be to our advantage right now, because if, as you're saying, NPR and PBS are going to be defunded, low power, because it's community funded, it's not going to be at risk in the same way that, you know.
Oh, you got muted.
Is that back?
Yep.
Good deal.
You're back.
Yeah. So if Trump and Elon try to defund radio in general, or if the big tech boys decide to do their best to censor the internet, all these kids that are using their cell phones may all of a sudden find there's a big blank spot, and low power radio would become a fallback position. And I do agree that the manufacture of the radio, the actual, transistor radios or whatever versions of radio there are, will have to be back in use. I would guess that there's going to be a flood of people, whether it's young or old, who will be looking for information, and low power will be there to fill that need.
Betty, your turn. Go ahead, Betty.
I don't think I have any more to add right now.
You're good. All right. You're good with everything. All right. Good deal.
Michael's got his hand up.
Michael, you got your
just
hand
briefly
up. Go
say
ahead.
that
There he is.
community radio needs to be wherever the people are on multiple platforms. Broadcast television has pretty much gone through this transformation where if their over-the-air signal goes off the air, most people don't notice because they're on cable, they're on satellite, etc. For radio, it's the same thing. The RF signal will be one of several methods that people can listen to you. I'm really interested in talking about ATSC 3 at some point, but maybe not today, because I see the real potential for that, but there's a lot of pitfalls. But I don't think we're going to get deep into that today. But Bennett, maybe later on, I'd like to talk to you about that. Anyway, that's that. So that's all I had to say on that.
Ben Cobb hasn't had much to say. Oh, Jim's raising his hand. I'm
No,
going to toss it over to you, Jim, and then can you toss it over to Ben Cobb after you're done, okay?
Sure. I will briefly say to talk about the next generation, Gen Zs. They got their nose stuck to their phone, and we, the old lefties, want to impart our wisdom and experience with only minimal success. The analogy I will use is the 50501 group, which attempted to organize 50 demonstrations at 50 state capitals all on one day. That has had minimal impact here in Austin. The first 501 rally at the steps of the state capitol drew 12 people. The second one drew a couple of hundred, maybe 700 or 800 people, and a pretty good mix of young people, old people, a lot of regulars such as myself who go down to the Capitol routinely. The third one was also rather marginal, and I was pretty much a crabgrass or a gripey pants on several lists saying, well, I don't see anybody from Austin on this list. And they said, it's not an Austin, it's organized by whoever steps up. And then, they made a lot of routine mistakes. They didn't have the free medical group. They didn't have people to hand out water. They hadn't touched base with the friendly Capitol Police liaison, which is always a good thing to do. They thought they had to have a permit to use a megaphone, which technically you do, but Austin never enforces that. And a lot of just, first timer mistakes that could have easily been avoided if they had just talked to people who had been coming down there for 20 or 30 or 40 years. And there was some arguing online. So the last one, just the other day, was maybe 800 people, pretty good turnout. The joke is in Austin, you can get 1,000 people to show up for any political demonstration. And it was a pretty good mix, but it was mainly trending towards people our age. There were a lot less Gen Zs who had returned a second time. And in closing on this point, demonstrations are, in my opinion, we are in Texas, but it's Austin, really only serve to identify those people who are still willing to stand out on the street corner with a sign. We're having no impact on the Texas legislature or the key committees. We're having no impact on the White House or the Congress. Our two congresspersons, Lloyd Doggett and Greg Casar, are wonderful, and we stand by them and they stand by us. But we are losing the battle. I tell people, sometimes even if they don't ask, the coup is well under the way. The coup started on election day, and it's a very well organized coup. They did a lot of key things, get rid of the lawyers first and all that, and they're well on their way. They'll win some battles, they'll lose some battles. Bannon said they would just throw so much at the media that they can't keep up. We are not optimistic. I tell people that most the people in the world don't live in democracies, and that the pain we feel are things being taken away from us. We're used to having all we can eat, and the cops will show up, and the corruption levels are low, and da da da. Those things may, not happen for us anymore, and that's the pain we feel. These little stations, in closing, these little LPFMs, which get no money from anybody except maybe a generous family in the neighborhood and $10, $20 T-shirts, get no federal funds. That is an advantage. And the fact that we're just so small, they're not worth bothering with. I mean, the federal government is not going to point its laser beam at Kyle, Texas, or Lockhart, or these little towns. They'll just fly under the radar. With so many other things to do, I think the LPFM community is, at this early month, the first month of the coup, we are generally safe. We need to have our physical facilities built out well. We need to have folks who are always good for a $100 check, and we'll ride this out. Passing it off to Ben, a wonderful resource he is. Where are you at, Ben?
Yeah,
There
we
he
are
is.
trying to get some federal money for LPFM
Okay.
through the FEMA grants.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Correct me.
Which are administered through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. People know that CPB grants to non-commercial radio, but what is new is that FEMA has supplied several tens of millions of dollars to CPB specifically to support resilience in the small and rural and underserved communities. Well, I have been on them to try to find out whether any of that money is flowing to LPFMs. We know that a good deal of it has been going to NPR and PBS stations, which may not exactly resemble the purported target of these funds. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. We have heard that several LPFMs, community LPFMs, have applied for these grants. I'm sorry to say that I have no influence over it, even though I worked in that office at FEMA. It's a different desk than I was in. FEMA is mainly interested in the survival of facilities for emergency public alerting. And that is what these grants are for. So electric power generation, the emergency alert system equipment, communications, perhaps improved antennas or towers or something like that. So this is really the only exception to the general observation that federal money has not flowed to the independent non-commercial stations. Well, at KZSM, our youngest program host is, I believe, 8 years old, and our oldest are certainly in their 70s. We have a wide range between them. Uh, it's exposure of the station to the community, whether it be by FM or podcast or streaming, all of these media, websites, all of these media. At GRC, we do encounter some really successful LPFM stations that have over 100 programmers, exciting, innovative presentation, graphics, presence in the community. Some of these raise all the money they need for the year on one day. So there's some creative fundraising going on. And these are the types of stations to emulate. So I am not pessimistic about it, but it requires a continuous presence in the community. And at KZSM, we are dealing with that issue as well, being a very small station, surviving off of grants and some donations, and looking to the future for how we're going to support this operation. Certainly, if the political tensions increase even further, I want to see LPFMs represent the progressive content. We have these discussions in the Facebook group that Jim mentioned, and some LPFMs say we will not address political topics at all. They're afraid of it. They're afraid that the FCC is going to find something wrong with it. And I am urging just the opposite. The website that Jim has brought up, or I'm not sure if Paul's brought it up, is WHIV in New Orleans, a wonderful station founded by an infectious disease AIDS physician, a specialist, and his wife. His station is located in a community center, and it just does marvelous programming. It's not only enjoyable, but also very professional with very few resources. WHIV was the host station for our last GRC in New Orleans, where oddly enough, that this is a side note, that our chair was an infectious disease specialist. Many of us came down with COVID at this conference. So these conferences are not professionalized, but they have become more successful and more organized as the years have gone on. So I'm very excited to hear that there are several other communities competing. I do recommend that you give a listen to WHIV online. It's a great example of what a station can do. I'm going to check out at this point. Michael, I would love to interact with you about ATSC3 radio. I really do believe at some point this thing is going to be an alternative for us, and I'm very concerned that the LPFM stations get a seat at that table. Thank you, everyone.
Ben, we've enjoyed having you. Before you jump out, tell us where people can find you, if you have a website or if there's some way they can, get in touch with you. Just let us know.
KOBB.us is my website. Simple as that.
Thanks for joining today, Ben. We really
Thank you, Paul. And we do need to get back in touch, maybe visit and talk on the air as well.
Well, I'll be down I'm up in Hot Springs now. I'll be down in Texas in around the 5th. So we'll hopefully get together. My son's coming in from California to go to South by, and I'm going to be putting up some antennas out there in Cedar Creek, and we'll talk on ham radio. How about that?
Excellent. All right.
All right. Thanks for joining. And I think Betty is ready to say something, and Michael, they both had their hands raised. You can lower your hands and speak away, Michael. Go ahead.
Hey, I was first.
You're first, Betty. You're first.
Very quick.
No, you don't have to be quick. Go ahead.
Thank you. So a friend of ours is the GM at a radio station in Salt Lake City, Full Power, and they were granted almost $500,000 grant through CPB. CPB. And they got an email saying, hold your horses, there's a stay on these grants. And we've heard about some other stations that have also gotten that email. So even though they're not LPFMs, the money is drying up.
Yeah, this was the next gen FEMA grants administered through the CPB that Bennett was talking about. And within the last 3 days, a number of stations have received a stop work notice from CPB, basically saying, we don't know if you're going to get the money or not, so don't spend any of it. And these are grants, in some cases, that were granted years ago and are just now being funded. So yes, the stuff is hitting the fan right now.
What should I make myself for lunch?
All right, so I think we're getting close to winding it down. Glad that Jim was making it. I was hoping Bob would make it today, but I think Bob will definitely make it the next show next Saturday. I know his birthday is March 4th, so he's going to be partying up big time on March 4th, and I'll be in Austin on March 5th, and we'll have another one of these meetings. I'll let Jim wrap it up today, and just why don't you sum everything up about what happened last week in the meeting with Jeremy and how that affects community radio going forward, and what your vision is for community radio going forward, and I'll let you wrap it up. Go ahead.
Oh, all righty. This is your radio wrap up for this week. I'm assuming this is a regular Zoom now?
Yeah, Saturdays at
Okay.
11, yeah.
Okay, and how many have you done so far?
This is number 2.
Okay, very good. All right. A lot of us are old timers and extremely experienced. We have some excellent resource people online here. You should come back next week. It's real easy. You can do the laundry, you can make lunch, you can let your cat play with your cat. Try to bring someone else. And as several of us have mentioned, the next generation needs to be on this call as well. I'm on the GRC list. I'm on the Radio for People list, Mike and Betty's excellent list. I'm on the Pacifica something list. Spend a lot of time on Zoom. That is the main way I think we all communicate. I think there's going to be a lot of bad news coming down the pike. Most of it will probably not directly affect us nice white middle class people who own real estate and have lawyers, but it's getting close. We personally know people who have left Texas because they're gay or their kids are trans. We're not optimistic. We'll let Ben be the optimist here. Anyhow, this has been an excellent meeting. I'm sorry I missed the first part of it. I had to cover a couple demonstrations. Viva Ukraine. And we'll talk to you all this channel next week at this time. Thank you all.
Next week at this time, Jim, and I hope everything's going good with you and your new venture. We're certainly looking forward to hearing it. And we're going to have a post comment from Judith, who has her hand raised, and we'll let Judith let us take us off today. Go ahead.
Actually, I'm going to hand it over to David for a moment. We're about to leave. I've got plenty I could say, but it'll wait till the next time I can meet up with you. This is fun, and I'm really glad you've included me in it.
Yeah, I was just going to add regarding the defunding of the stations. I'm wondering if the low power stations are trying to use solar as much as possible. It would seem to me that solar or wind power to power the stations would be a wise investment, for the final use of the pockets of money.
Yeah, we got a guy here in Hot Springs. Jim knows him very well. Bob Nagy built many solar powered radio stations, and the KUHS station here in Austin. Of course, they've got the solar powered mainstream station out in
Dripping.
The hill country, yeah.
Yeah, it's called Sun Radio. It's a real, not to get into a whole new subject, but it's a real anomaly. It is, in my opinion, the best sounding music station in Austin. He has 2 or 3 LPFMs that he hands the signal off. He's got a repeater, a translator. It's Sun Radio, and it's 100% solar powered, both the station and the tower. The guy who runs it is a real go-getter. He has very good lawyers, I have no doubt. Most people don't really care about the backstory of how they got the license or this or that. But if you're interested in a very successful story about using solar radio, go to Sun Radio and look at their solar section.
Yeah,
Good deal.
very good.
Yeah, I was the last pockets of money. It would seem to me that, you know, what is it? Possession is 9/10 of the law, and if you've got the power source, then you don't need the ongoing sustaining money for the power.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone today for joining this. I really enjoyed having you all on board here for the second episode of the future of radio. And we'll meet next week at 11. And we're going to have a pre-show before that, starting early, a couple hours before, where everybody can get mic checks, they can get video checks, we can check their framing. I don't have a luff meter yet, but I hope to get a luff meter in here. All right,
Nerd.
yeah, Jim, you're waving me off. All right, all right. We'll talk to everybody soon. Have a great time, and just catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Good week.
See ya.
Well, it was pretty